It's been a couple classes that I did this.
No, the reason I'm clumping these all up here is because a lot of stuff is all happening at once. All of a sudden. Well, it's not like all of a sudden, but the intensity of development is just amazing. Not only musically, which I mean that's good. How familiar are you with Mendelssohn?
Might
Your favorite?
recognize.
What's your favorite Mendelssohn piece? I see. Well, I'll pick one that I think you probably can all sing for me, and that's. I don't want the sight. Let's go like this.
Oh.
Everybody knows this. But where is it from?
Germany? No, it's waiting.
That's true. It is, yes. Whereas he wrote it for a British play.
I've heard it in a lot of movies.
And weddings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's leave that there. Okay, so that's just the music, but it tells you that it's from A Midsummer Night's Dream. So let's get rid of the wedding and go to funny we don't have.
Did you see the Cherokee response to Elizabeth Warren's DNA results or whatever?
No.
Oh, they said it was like a joke.
That's what Kelly.
They said it was like insanely disrespectful, like a big joke. I don't know. Should be interesting to see how that.
Well, she was
pans
after
out.
$1 million.
Well, right. I mean,
Apparently,
it wasn't.
Trump had made a bet with her that if she could prove that she was an American native in some
Right,
part of her
and-
trade, then he
yeah.
would give her $1 million, and she figured this demonstrated that she was, and so now
I think it
he's
really
saying, I
backfired
never
on her.
promised that.
I think it backfired on her because like a bunch of Native American organizations
They're
have
all
come
left.
out against her. Like, no, you shouldn't have done that.
Hey, are you making music or not? I don't hear nothing.
Don't
Overture?
hear anything?
So this is like right after Napoleon, huh? Or would it been during.
Mendelssohn was just a kid, really, when he died. He didn't live very long. I just wrote down 1809.
That's his birthday. Okay.
1847. Yeah, so 1847. So he died very young.
So he
Lincoln,
died
65.
right before
Darwin was pretty old, much older. So there is some over. Even though Marx is not born until 1818 and doesn't come to England until he gets kicked out of Germany, then gets kicked out of France.
So Mendelssohn didn't really see the 1848 stuff in Germany then, so it was like right after.
Right. He wouldn't have. I've not read his biography or anything.
So what's up with the anti-Semitism with all the old composers? Like a long period of relative denigration.
Well, actually, anti-Semitism
Seems like it was fairly commonplace back in the day.
was commonplace since really Christianity, because the first Christians would have been Jews, but
Right.
Paul made it his mission to convert the Gentiles. And a big break with the pillars of Jerusalem, Peter and the others, between Paul, who had never met Jesus actually,
Right.
was over whether or not the Gentiles had to become Jews before they could become Christians. And Paul takes it that they don't have to,
Right.
because not very many, especially adult males, want to go through certain operations.
Right.
Yeah.
That's specifically what they were very worried about. But also their dietary laws and all sorts of habit changes that most Greeks did not want to adapt to. They just, like, why not? You know, Jesus saved us, you know, we just should accept Jesus.
So how did all of the Jews get into Europe? I mean, at some point, were they just
well,
always
Rome.
there?
Rome made it possible for everyone to go everywhere. It
Right.
wasn't just the Jews to go
Right.
to
Big
Rome and
empire.
other places. There are artifacts in homage of the Egyptian god Isis in Spain,
Wow.
where they had celebrations during the Roman Empire. And so it became a very
So it was basically like
multicultural.
they basically were in a multi-ethnic empire that collapsed, and then they found themselves sort of isolated in it.
I mean, it depends on how you interpret the
From your
collapse.
point of view.
Yeah, if you go with, I guess
Or
the
it's evolved.
classical
It's evolution.
interpretation, thanks to Gibbon, you end up with, you know, in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
And the rise of the Holy Roman Empire.
But strictly
was none of
speaking,
those. Yeah.
right across the highway here is a papal flag, which is essentially the flag of the Roman Empire.
Right.
And the Pope is the heir to the throne of Rome in more ways than one. In fact, Caesar was actually the high priest as well as the emperor. So the Pope, in many ways, is not simply the head of the church, he's also the
Head of
head
state.
of the kingdom of God on earth, which, I mean, there's different ways of thinking of that as the continuation of the Roman Empire.
So
Even politically, because
just a lot more delegated.
Vatican is a real country
Right.
in a way.
It is.
That happened thanks to Mussolini, actually.
There's like isn't there San Marino or something over there too? There's like a few like little tiny dots in Italy that are sovereign.
Yeah, I suppose there.
I think so.
Yeah,
There's a
the
bunch of
kingdom
them, yeah.
along the French Riviera is Monaco,
Yeah.
and that's its own kingdom. There's a lot of little Malta is its own.
Liechtenstein.
Grand Duchy of Finland.
Yeah, Liechtenstein.
It's only like 20 miles across.
Yeah.
But the
I just always wondered how like so many Jews ended up in Europe. Like.
well, it was called the diaspora,
Yeah.
and that part of the, but they had spread out even before that. But once Rome crushed,
Because it's always painted as none of it's painted as colonization. It's always painted as like fleeing. So it's just an interesting history.
right. Well, I doubt that you could think of the Jewish people as colonizing
Right.
anything because there wasn't an attempt for them to literally take over a place.
Well, they were just kind of the Syrian refugees of their day. I mean, they kind of came from the same area and followed the same land routes, right?
Right, but they were, but there weren't nations back when that first started.
No.
And Rome, opened the borders. It was kind of an advance on the EU, except even bigger, except for the north.
Yeah.
They didn't get that far north, but the Vikings actually spread south, and a lot of Vikings ended up in Italy and Sicily and other places. But so I would argue that what you have is not just the Jewish people spreading all over the world, but you also have the Roma,
Mm-hmm.
right, which are used to be called gypsies when I was a kid.
Right.
Although I don't know where we got that, but there are other folks that blend. The Germans went east. So if you look at,
There's some ethnic German spots in Russia, like.
right, well they went, they spread around.
Like, there's pockets of everybody everywhere. But it's just interesting because you end up with these weird, like, isolated little ethnic pockets all over Europe.
Yeah. Well, Germantown in Philadelphia, which isn't German anymore.
No, well, World War I
There are
kinda
more-
messed people up.
There are more Polish people in Chicago than there are in Warsaw.
I'm
as far as
sure.
I know. Or at least that was the case at one time.
Well, before World War I,
And Irish,
the
there
German
are way more
language
Irish
press
in the
was
United
huge.
States than in Ireland,
mhm.
because Ireland is really kind of tiny.
That's just interesting. I don't know, because like Europe's always had these ethnic mixes, and then like the Jews seem to be a specific.
Well, and
They get singled out,
flourish.
like-
They flourish because they were not Christian,
Mhm.
and Christians had laws against using money in certain ways. The Jews did not follow, and as a result, they became the bankers.
But I mean, that's just such a small minority
That-
of them, though. It's like
That meant that they were like the Wall Street everywhere they went.
right.
And when things are going great, everyone is fine with that. But when the market crashes, which it does cyclically, everyone would typically blame those with the money, which always turned out to be the Jews, always, because of the laws, really. It wasn't until much later that the laws changed so that Christians could use interest. That was a capital offense to charge interest on a loan. So who the heck would loan money to anyone you didn't get anything back for it? It was always a loss, right? But the Jews were allowed to make interest. Of course, they always have this cultural disdain for them. One of the famous aspects of that is they were called Christ killers. because the argument was that they were the ones that literally had Jesus crucified, not the Romans.
Yeah,
There's
no.
a famous story in the Bible, if you're familiar with it, where Bar-Abbas is offered up, along with Jesus, to the Jews by Pilate for release. Some Roman tradition, right? No, none of that was true. The Romans never gave criminals back to the people if they asked for them. Their favorite way to deal with criminals was to string them up or crucify them or just beat the crap out of them. Pilate famously lost his job because he finally got so mad at the Jews that he crucified thousands of them along the road to Damascus from Jerusalem.
Sounds familiar.
You could basically walk the whole way and see crucified people all along the way. And
The Middle East has come so
I think
far.
it was Gaius Caesar was so upset with him that he promoted him somewhere else.
That's awesome.
So, that was
Yeah,
kind of...
that's a classic thing, it's still
and
used
so
today.
he's going to be old.
Yeah.
His wife is going to come to him and say, I had a dream, don't do anything to that Jewish carpenter. No, that's just fraudulent storytelling. But also the idea that he would offer to give one up, and Bar-Abbas, which means son of the father, and is not a Jewish name, but was Jesus' title. Because he was Yeshua Bar-Abbas. Right? So that was actually, they screwed that one up, right? So it's clearly a story that was told to convert Romans, who were basically saying, see, it wasn't the Romans that crucified Jesus. It wasn't Pilate's fault.
So
The Jews made him.
Got it. So it's just a lot of narrative.
Yeah. And there's others, that when you look at the intense analysis of those stories that happened after, it was called The Quest for the Historical Jesus. Right? And Albert Schweitzer was probably the first to coin that and try to figure out what was actually historical in the scripture and what was made up. Like the Magi, the story of the Magi, that's clearly made up, and you can tell it's made up by someone who lives in the West, because the Magi look up and they see a star in the east, and they follow it from Persia, which is in the
To
east,
Jerusalem,
to
yeah.
Jerusalem, which is in the west. And they were really wise, weren't they? They went the wrong way.
They followed that star.
But, the thing is, from the standpoint of those making up the story,
Jerusalem's in the east.
it's in the east.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a giveaway. Plus, Bethlehem, at the time of the birth of Jesus, was a tourist area for people who wanted to go.
So there would have been
buy.
lots of hotels.
Well, the cave itself was a gift shop
No.
where you could go and buy statues and things of Sargon the Great, who was supposed to have been born in that cave. So that cave was a famous cave. If you were going to be a significant individual, you had to be born in that cave. That was
Makes sense.
like part of the story. Sargon the Great. You could look him up. He's pretty interesting. But yeah, so at the time of Jesus' birth, Sargon the Great was like a tourist thing, and everybody would go to buy statues and things of Sargon the Great in that cave, which was a gift shop then. So no, nobody was actually born in a gift shop, and it wasn't a staple. And by the way, the Romans didn't make people move all over the countryside
Just for census, yeah.
They would take a census of where people were living. makes sense, doesn't it? You know, you don't want to figure out where were they born. That's not, it doesn't make sense. You want to know where people are living because it's for tax purposes. And they did do censuses of sorts. And by the way, they did not kill infant children by the mass to try to make sure that they got a specific
Jesus.
one. Yeah, none of that. So there's all sorts of stories that seem clearly made up in order to make Jesus more significant. He was born in Nazareth. That's almost a given. He was a Nazarene. People were born where they were from. So that's pretty. So there's all sorts of stuff that's kind of interesting when you study those kinds of texts.
Anthropology is cool. That's like.
However, so the diaspora happened even before Rome destroyed Jerusalem, because during the Roman period there were there were Jews in Rome. You were merchants. You traveled, did all sorts of moving around, and if you liked a place, you stayed there.
Right.
And I bet Rome was a lot more interesting a place for a lot of people. Millions of, I don't know if it was millions, but a couple 100,000 at least. So, and there were Jewish. If they wanted to, and they should have, sometime during their life they should visit the temple. It's very similar to the way Islamic people feel that sometime in their lifetime they should go.
Was it still standing up back then, or?
Pardon?
Was the temple still standing back then?
It was
or was
destroyed
it the second
in
one?
68.
Because that was like its own tourist thing, right?
When did the Romans destroy Jerusalem? 70. But that was just Jerusalem. There were lots of people that were still living in Palestine.
Right.
There were when Israel got started after World War II, there were Jewish people living there that had lived there
Forever, pretty much.
Yeah. Although they were not really appreciated, I think, by a lot of the incoming European Jews because they were so Middle Eastern, and so it really was a cultural shift.
Oh, I'm sure.
And
Israel's practically a European nation. It
explains Trump's feeling when he had been traveling in a couple of cities, and then arrived in Jerusalem for a conference, and sitting there among other members of the government in Israel, says to them, as you know, we're traveling in the Middle East. Somehow thinking he was no longer in the Middle East, which no, Israel is clearly in the Middle East. And a couple of people looked around at one another and started laughing. He seriously was thinking he was no longer in the Middle East when he said that, and so that's kind of hilarious. But that explains to me, though, in arriving in Israel, he felt like he was back in a modern country,
right,
where he did not feel that in the other places he was at. And if you've used Google Earth to look around them, you know exactly why he feels that way.
Well, Israel's nice, and then everywhere else is pretty well. It's also just the aesthetics, I'm sure. Israel's got really Western aesthetics and architecture.
Yeah, well, I mean, even the countries right, around Israel, you go through the border and you are in a third world.
Mm-hmm.
But Israel is not. It has all modern everything. Okay, so coming back to this, John Stuart Mill is our focus today. But what I'm of course thinking of here is the milieu. You know, if you're trying to get a picture of what's going on, the whole milieu is radically modernizing. And Mill is one of the important people that does that. His father, by the way, James, was a radical already. They're friends of this guy. Here we go. Pull up this guy, who's a utilitarian. So this is utilitarianism. And by the way, there's a chain. So you could chain him down to Hume, Berkeley. I mean, so you know, there's no breaks actually. At this point, still there's a chain of you know, almost hands-on.
I didn't really
passing
understand
on
Hume. I don't know. Like we were talking about him in one of my other classes, and I didn't really get it.
Shoot, that was my job to make sure. We'll have to get together and discuss.
Probably, yeah.
Because I can help with that. Hume is very easy, I think, to figure out once you get the
Well,
basics.
just, I don't know, like the way my other professor was talking about it was like he was trying to deny causality as like a thing. Like it's not, it's imaginary.
It's not denying causality, it's denying our belief that we know, we have knowledge of causes.
Right.
Because Hume is a skeptic, and he points out that our belief in causality is basically a belief in our memory of causal relationships. So it's based on
So it's
memory.
more faith in your mind than
Memory.
it is faith in the physical world.
Right, right. And,
Okay.
and so Hume keeps pointing out that we can't actually trust our memory. But the thing is, what he's criticizing is those who believe they absolutely know.
Well, like Descartes, right? Because like he contrasted the two.
Well, you know, Descartes is a precursor to Hume,
Right.
and you know, about the only thing in that respect, Hume, I think, accepts mathematics, no problem, and that was, I think, the political point that Descartes was trying to make, is that you can't trust the church telling you what's true. You can trust mathematics, so it's a
Right.
shift to a more scientific, what we would now
So-
call scientific.
Okay.
But Hume doesn't disagree with that. But there is the problem that mathematics is totally non empirical, right? So,
Right. It
so
is
knowing that
abstract.
1 + 1 = 2 chairs, my certitude in that has nothing to do with there actually being 2 chairs.
No.
I'm applying math to my empirical experience, but I can doubt my empirical experience without having to doubt mathematics, which is totally abstract,
Okay, gotcha.
not an empirical science.
Gotcha.
So people
So he's
that-
saying that they're parallel sciences. They're not fully integrated, basically. Like they don't. They math is descriptive, but it's not.
I'm not sure what you mean by parallel in that sense, because in a sense, mathematics concept. So from the British empiricist
So
point
he's
of
saying
view,
that you can use mathematics for like a model in your mind, I guess.
right,
But
and then you impose
can't.
those models on your experience, but that doesn't mean that the experience,
So it's up to interpretation, basically.
right, which means we can have all sorts of different
Right.
interpretations, different models. That's remember I think
We
I
can even
showed-
come up with different numbers because we use, you use inches, I use centimeters. Right. So.
that too. How do you measure stuff?
Right.
How do you weigh?
Well, and then you
things?
got to get to the concept of
You know, when
oneness.
When you think about when, they started trying to measure things, Galileo would be one of those, inventing all sorts of devices to try to measure stuff, like time and things. They didn't have measurements that they could guarantee. The same. You know, how do you make machines that are exactly the same? That was actually,
Right.
you know, cannons would blow up on people because initially they would make cannons by welding bits of metal together, and then the trouble is the weld sometimes didn't hold. So you're on a ship, you load the cannon, you aim at the other ship, fire it, and the cannon blows your ship up. Not very good, right? So the guy that invented a drill that you could make a cannon out of one solid hunk of iron, right? And then drill the bore, and that was an incredible invention. That was a significant invention because now the cannons were much more trustworthy. You could fire them and they wouldn't explode themselves. So you were, hey, I can trust my cannon.
Got
Right?
it.
You know, and then they got better and better and better at making tools. So inventing tools that could actually do exactly the same work, so that you ended up with copies. So
he's
I forget.
saying sometimes you can't trust. You can always trust the empirical reality. You can always trust the stuff that you can touch and see and tell.
Only for a moment.
Only in that moment, right?
Right.
Right.
So what Hume was trying to do is criticize the philosophers that thought that they knew stuff absolutely. And that succeeds. And we still have a cultural disposition to doubt.
Right.
And to hope that science, despite all its marvels, will actually get even better
Well, you should have talked to
in
Hegel,
the next.
right?
Hume?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were not contemporaries. Well, by 6 years.
Yeah.
But Hume and Hegel, I don't think Hume spoke German. And Hegel, by 6 years old, didn't
Right,
speak
yeah.
much, you know. So
Didn't have
not,
the
not a
absolute.
big
Yeah.
issue. But yeah, I remember the guy that designed a machine so that the pieces for flintlocks were made, so that he took like 20, like a show and tell thing for the military. He had like 20 of these flintlocks. He took them all apart and just had all the pieces like in boxes, and then he reassembled 20 to demonstrate that the pieces were you could build it out of, it didn't have to be
Right.
made specifically, and that was like, whoa, that's never been done before. And that was an improvement in like making arms and other machines, so that you begin having ways of measuring, you know, the
So-
pieces, etc.
Got
That
it.
was all new. But Bentham, he's actually still there. Let me see. I can put the pictures on here. There he is.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Did I ever show you that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's actually where's his face? His actual face is usually sitting down here on the floor in the box, because this is a wax face.
Oh.
But that's actually his body,
Oh, cool.
and mummified, sitting there. And they wheel him into the meetings and sign him in as president. That's kind of cool.
That is interesting. And they say that the church is weird. Like, what meetings?
It's not the Royal Society, it's at the University College.
of London. What is he?
The Board of Trustees or something.
Do they own
so
him, or
here's-
did he
so
donate
here's-
himself? Oh, cool.
So, one of my students, by the way, went and posed in front of that box and posted a selfie on Facebook. I thought, wow, that's cool. And I encouraged the student to go and find that and actually stand in front of it. And that was fun. So if you're ever in England and you stop by the university there, and it's just like the bookstore and the cafeteria. It's not like any special part in the building. It's like the entranceway, and they've got that sitting there. You know, it's just. And Moscow, if you were going to look at the mausoleum with Lenin.
Well, it's like all special and stuff.
Yeah,
right?
that's like you have to get in line and everything. But no,
Bentham's
in
just
London,
chilling.
Bentham is just sitting there by the coffee shop. You know, so British.
That's so British.
Yeah, like oh, he's over here. Where's Bentham? Oh, it's just there. No sign.
Seems like a Weekend with Bentham sort of movie.
But utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is kind of an old philosophy with a new title, utility, usefulness. And the main thing is that the highest value is happiness. And that's pleasure, specifically pleasure. We're machines, goes back to Hobbes, you know, we're all machines and we're seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. So yeah, that becomes the principle of utility. Specifically, the greatest good for the greatest number. So how can you make more of us happy and less of us sad? Is utilitarianism. And you know, the James Mill was a good friend, and they had him over to the house a lot, and that kept up, you know, that kind of personal relationships. So John Stuart Mill, when he was an older person, would visit Bertrand Russell's house. You know, so there was this personal, hands-on kind of relationship between these folks. And they were politically interested in changing the laws to protect the common people.
Well, it looks like they were opposed to natural rights. Or at least Bentham was. I don't really know what they mean by that. But.
I don't know what that means either in that case, in that context. Although probably has to do with Rousseau.
Oh, he's friends with Smith.
The overlap. These
Yeah.
people knew one another.
That must have been a heck of like a 40 years right there.
Yes, yes. And you know, this group, there was a book, the Philosophical Breakfast Club, which talks about 4 of these scientists. These 4. So Charles Babbage, John Herschel, William Whewell, and Richard Jones. So this was a great book, by the way, very interesting. More history, but about these 4 British scientists that basically took science out of the gentleman's club, where it was kind of your own private, you know, you would buy equipment and do experiments, right? And it came out of that club and it became something the government helped support. When was...
So it was probably more about spreading the information about, right? I mean, I'm sure there was lots of stuff that was discovered all over Europe for hundreds of years that just kind of like faded out with the people that found them. If all science is private.
So, if you go here...
Greenwich Mean Time.
So this is, am I in maps?
No.
Shoot. What's neat is if you go and visit Greenwich, they have 0 there. Like you could walk over the line.
Maybe if you click on the coordinates, it might link you to Google Maps.
Oh yeah, yeah. On the left. Yeah, there you go.
That's Wikipedia Maps.
Yeah.
What happened to Greenwich though?
Zoom out.
Zoom out?
Yeah.
Here. So the observatory should be right here. And so the line points right down this whole, it's like, I don't know why.
So is that Greenwich Mean Time right there? Is that what we're looking at?
Right, this is where the maps begin.
Yeah.
If you go on to like the satellite picture, you can actually, maybe I can.
Oh, cool.
I lost it.
Oh, wait.
What happened to Greenwich?
Zoom in.
Well, I could go,
It's the red pen, right?
it's still,
Zoom out again. I think it's down to the left.
oh, Woolwich. So it's
Dulwich.
here.
Right. Brixton.
I don't know what happened to it, but we could go like Greenwich.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't want to go into the toilet.
Oh, cool.
You can
And click the
actually
person.
straddle the line here. Not finding.
Do you have to click like the person view?
Oh yeah, we've done that before. Ah, okay. Oh, so I'm actually, you have to go in. Shoot, well, you can actually straddle the time zone. So,
Oh, there it
this is it right here. See this strip right here?
Yeah.
The picture hasn't done a very good job. But this strip right here is, I'm pretty sure, the actual 0 degrees. And so you could like stand there and you're like straddling the time zone, you know, where
Leave it to the British to say, we are the center of all the maps.
and it actually travels straight down that long field all the way down to the Navy Academy there, and out, you know, so it's like a single line, and there's some buildings in the Navy Academy that are like kind of clumped around it so that it makes it like kind of a, you know, like you're looking straight down. That's like, and people, yeah, that's it. See how it's, and the reason people are all standing around it is because it's like, hey, let's go stand on it and get our selfies, you know, on stand, you know, so you can stand.
I can see a bunch of my relatives doing
Yeah, and with my Oculus Rift, I actually could go like around the whole site into the buildings. You could see the telescopes and stuff. You could stand on that, and so in my living room, it felt like I was standing on the line. It's just cool.
Oh, is that when you were doing your VR?
Right, you can
Yeah.
do that. You feel like you're standing there. So that's kind of cool. But when was that started? I mean, that's when they're fixing the maps. One of the scientists of that four is involved in figuring out the tides. One of them is the one that takes his telescope south to South Africa and studies the stars down there for the first time, which, by the way, they're different. You know, so that's kind of cool, right? You know, because you can't see those from here. There's kind of a point at which things change. Yes? So this is all absolutely fascinating time period where all sorts of things, they're obviously Darwin, 1859, publishes The Origin of the Species, so that's absolutely exciting. John Stuart Mill in 1859 publishes On Liberty, which is the book that basically starts liberalism. It's very different. Might call it more, I think, this is just me, I'm thinking it's closer to what we would call libertarianism
Probably.
today than liberalism. But when you read about James Mill and his son and their enthusiasms, they were, so at the time there were the Whigs, who were headquartered pretty much in Edinburgh, or even though they fled, a lot of them to the colonies and inspired the second attempt to revolt against England, which took, and we have our wonderful experiment. There were still a lot of Whigs there. In fact, the Whigs are still an important party there. Their opponents were the Tories, right, which were more
Because we had a Whig party
aristocrats.
forever, didn't we? We had Whig presidents, I think.
It was actually an American party, the
Yeah.
Whig Party. Yeah.
Because that was kind of what collapsed before the GOP.
Right. But the interesting thing from James Mill's point of view, John Stuart's father, was that both the Whigs and the Tories were still aristocratic, which makes sense, actually. And he was for the common people, so he was rebelling. So he was writing political papers against the Whigs, but not because he was a Tory, but because he was rebelling even more so. So much more socialist. Keep in mind that Marx, a lot of the years towards the end of his life, especially, you know, he died there, right?
Right.
Was in London and concerned about the same things that Charles Dickens is concerned about, and that is the poverty, because we've got the Industrial Revolution happening now, right? We've invented the steam engine. That was part of the importance of figuring out how to drill these holes, because the steam engines initially that that they came up with leaked steam, and they were useless, right? But once they were able to drill with much greater perfection, the engine, then they were able to keep the steam trapped,
Gotcha.
and then use it and make pistons that would actually convert useful energy. And so you ended up with all of these factories at the beginning that now can produce things much more rapidly, et cetera, right? Adam Smith was involved with that too, you know, making pins and things, you know. A lot of that is just, you know, common. You know, we can make so much stuff today, we don't even think about it, but all that was hand done before they had machines that could do that stuff, right? You know, the guy that made your clock made all of the parts by hand.
Those German cuckoo clocks.
You know, that's why the Swiss clocks were famous, you know, but now, you know, you don't have parts, basically. Well, they're on a chip, right?
Main clock, the atomic clock, whatever they call it.
But let me go to my notes on
Oh, the Panopticon. We didn't get to talk about that.
Panopticon.
Yeah.
Notes.
I think that was Bentham's thing. It's like a prison design.
So, John Stuart Mill follows Jeremy Bentham, utilitarianism. By the way, how do you determine how happy people are? You use a hedonistic calculus. A hedon is a single measurement of happiness. So, like an inch, you know, a hedon is a happy.
That's one happy.
How many hedons do you got?
I'm not sitting at enough hedons.
And governmental reforms to help the poor were part of the picture. And Mill followed his father into the employ also of the British East India Company, and that was their main source of income, their employment there. The office where he worked, you can actually still see it. It's on the 3rd floor of the building, overlooking one of the squares, etc. So you can see where, and Mill had exactly the same breakfast every day.
Yeah.
And you know, they made, you know, tea and, you know, the same way, you know, as you know, they had a routine that would have bored the heck out of everybody today, I guess. You know, that's the way they kind of did everything. But Dad educated him because they were atheists, and you couldn't go to the universities unless you were willing to sign the Statement of Belief and the British, the Church of England, and they wouldn't, and so he couldn't go to the universities. So his education was homeschooled, but it was intensive, way more than what he could have gotten actually at the universities. So he was so overeducated that as a young man he actually had a depressing episode where he, you know, almost went crazy, but he got over it. So that's helpful. He was also convinced he was not very bright. So he felt like he knew people that were geniuses, but what he had to do was really study hard in order to try to kind of keep up with them. So he didn't feel like he was very brilliant personally, right? So his mental crisis was when he was in his 20s. In 1830, he meets Harriet Taylor. She was the wife of a friend, and their relationship was chaste, even though they liked one another. But when the friend died, then they got married, and they lived. They were man and wife after that. And in fact, they worked together on some books. For example, on the subjection of women. That publication, they both wrote together. So he did spend one term in Parliament. He's very important when we think about logic and the advances in logic. Up until this point, there were some individuals that tried to improve a kind of practical inductive logic that scientists could use. Francis Bacon was one of those. Oddly, Roger Bacon, a monk in the Middle Ages, was interested. So I don't know, maybe it has something to do with bacon. I don't know. But it didn't advance very far. But John Stuart Mill's methods were significant. A nice big book that improved their ability to think correctly, basically. And a lot of it just seems absolutely ridiculous by our measure, but if you think about it, back in that day, people still thought that life spontaneously generated. So if you had a wet shirt and a food source nearby, poof, instant mice. It would just happen. Mill instituted controls.
Wait, really?
Yes.
They
Yes.
thought they just...
Magic.
Dang.
I mean, it would explain fruit flies.
That would explain fruit flies. Except that they... all the eggs in fruit.
But so
Bananas.
one of the significant things is replication of a experiment is important. If you can't do the same experiment twice and get the same results, there's something wrong with it. And controls, like put a box around the shirt that's damp,
Yeah.
even with the food source in there. Put both in there in the box and check it every once in a while and see if you've got baby mice. And guess what? No. So spontaneous generation of life, not something that happens. Concomitant variations, that's where cause and effects happen, like this, right? Joint method of agreement and difference. So what is agreement of? I've got A, B, C, D, and as a result of that, I end up with F. And then I have A, B, D, and I have F. But I have A, C, D, and I don't get F. I begin thinking that there's something important about B that gives me F, right? So that would be agreement, right? Difference is, of course, you take something away and you don't get it. So that's difference, right? And then when you have the joint method of agreement and difference, that gives you the strongest relationship between cause and effect. That doesn't mean that you've proved anything, because Hume is accepted,
Right.
but it's much stronger. Another very important aspect of utilitarianism is that they are consequentialists. And that means that you're trying to improve the overall happiness of a situation, right? And the happiness is at the end. So if, say I do a scientific experiment and I don't tell 100 patients that they're actually still sick. And the reason I do this is because I want to see the progression of the disease. Because that will help me in my overall knowledge, right? So I'm lying to these 100 patients, right? But as a result of lying to them, I've kind of screwed them for their life. But guess what? I've learned a lot that now will help me save millions of people. So the consequences make it just that I mistreated those 100, but it was worth it. So that's a utilitarian ethic. It's very different than, for example, a Kantian ethic who would argue that everybody has to be treated with respect for their own intrinsic worth, right? So you can't do that to 100 people, even for the benefit of millions, right? That's wrong. But a utilitarian says that's a good deal, right? It might hurt those 100, but it's well worth it because now I'm benefiting millions with it. Same thing with rabbits. You know, if I'm going to put eye cream or something on rabbits to see if it hurts the eyes, it might hurt the rabbits. But hey, it's going to save the humans if it turns out to be painful. It's better to hurt the rabbits than people. That's a consequentialist, utilitarian point of view. So very, very useful in the medical field, for example, but not just that. You know, if I'm trying to kill Osama bin Laden, you know, and it just so happens that he's in a home where there's other family members and people that are not him, obviously, you know, and you know, specifically we break into his room and there's a woman that he's holding in front of himself to protect himself. You shoot the woman and shoot him. That's worth it because you got him. That's consequentialist. You know, the main thing was to get him. That we shot some others that had nothing to do with his crimes, etc. No problem. Side effect of you know the same thing with we're collateral damage. Yeah, if we're blowing up a terrorist, one of the leaders, he's in a car, 4 other people in the car. We don't even know who they are. Could care less. We're getting him. You know, that's collateral damage too. But you know what? We're happy we got him. That's a consequential. Pardon?
You're with him, you're a target.
Yeah. Well, they, might be the cab driver. Doesn't even know who this guy is. You know, could be. You know, a couple people all got out of the airport. You know, one of them. Can we all fit in the back? Yep, okay, drop me off at so-and-so. No one else in the cab knows who this is, but if we blow up the cab, hey, tough on them, So that's utilitarianism, consequentialism. That's also one of the critiques of it, that, if you're a deontologist and believe it's wrong to do this to these other people, then you have a problem with this as a moral ethic. But there's other issues too, and that is when you're thinking in terms of the greater good for the greater number. That's Voldemort. That's a British ethic, right? And when J.K. Rowling criticizes that, she's criticizing a utilitarian point of view. The greatest good for the greatest number. That's almost identical to the Death Eater principle in the Harry Potter series, right? So the greater good, that becomes the phrase, that Dumbledore uses when he's in his youth. That not Gilderoy Lockhart. Who's the friend Grindelwald, right? We're going to see some more movies, by the way, right? You're familiar with Grindelwald.
Are we going to see more movies?
He was the baddie that came out at the end of the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, right? Yeah, so we're going to see more of this utilitarian ethic espoused by Grindelwald in the sequence movies. I think there's supposed to be 5 coming up, so we're going to see more Harry Potter-ish stuff as it goes. So that's fun. But so you can have a critique of that point of view too, right? That it's the greater good, but who gets to decide? Who gets mistreated? Who are the muggles that are underneath the magic world, holding them up in their rightful place, right? That kind of thing. So that's kind of interesting if you want to throw that in there and think about, hey, J.K. Rowling. By the way, K is not her, she doesn't have a middle name. They invented that so that she could be J.K.
Just kidding.
Did you know that?
No, but now I'm going to go bring like Harry Potter books.
Not my fault. They call her Jo. Lady Rowling.
Well, she's like, they're Shakespeare now. It's like
they
the number one
boys
thing in
would
British
not buy a
literature.
book written by a woman, so they made it J.K. growling so no one would know that it was a woman.
They don't know.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, but this good book was fooled me. It's written by a woman.
And it's about witchcraft.
Yeah.
So what else is kind of important?
What did they say? 1776, down on the bridge.
Subjection one. So that's pretty much it. Quiz question. I didn't give you one yet. Complete this phrase. Better to be a dissatisfied human than a happy pig. Better to be a dissatisfied Socrates than a what?
Then a happy.
So, yeah, you could just Google this, you'll see. Better to be a dissatisfied human than a happy pig. By the way, I've had some folks tell me they would actually rather be a happy pig than a dissatisfied human. And that just seems intuitively wrong to me. Why would you want to be a happy pig? Because you know, the pig is happy right now, but right above its head says $5.98 a pound.
That's why the pig is happy.
So your happiness is not going to last.
So would you rather be happy for a short time or unhappy for a long time?
That's the true immortality question.
Well, so, you know, when you phrase it this way, his concern is that Socrates, Mill was not that happy.
It doesn't sound like any of these guys are that happy.
You get more of an education. The more education you get, the more things you're aware of that's screwed up in the world.
Yeah.
The less happy you're likely
philosophy
to be.
isn't like the happy person's domain.
It can be quite depressing. When I say goodbye to some friends, the one friend always says, "Stay sane."
Yeah. Right.
He's worried about me. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, really, you know, he said, "Stay sane," you know, because he figures, you know, at any moment, all of a sudden, you know,
thinking seems to be a function of discomfort.
Life sucks. Ah! You know.
I don't think very much when I've got everything I need.
That's when you take a vacation.
There's no such thing.
Well, pretend.
My whole life is one big vacation.
Then you've been fortunate.
Yes. I mean, look where I'm in a tourist area.
Yeah.
We live in a place that
Got these
people
mountains
spend
in here.
their life savings to go visit for 2 weeks. I live here.
You're not wrong.
So every day I look out and I see this. That's magnificent. I post a picture of that and everybody says, "Oh, I like that," you know. Yeah, well, that's because they're living in Philadelphia, you know.
All I see is concrete.
Yeah,
Bricks.
yeah. But look at that. Wow, that's gorgeous. And it changes every day. We live in an absolutely magical place. And yet, we just go right over there and I can buy whatever I want. And I've got the internet.
Alaska's pretty beautiful from the inside of your American-made SUV.
Actually, my
The
SUV
Japanese.
mine is, I think, Slovakia.
What?
It's an Audi. I don't know
Oh.
where the heck they made it, but I'm pretty sure it's a German car made somewhere else in Europe where the
Slovakia, probably. Czechoslovakia.
Labor's cheap.
labor's cheap. Yeah, so pretty sure it's one of the.
I don't know. Alaska is pretty cool, but it seems like it's all heavily dependent on outside investment.
You can't even get these kinds of pins that say like Alaska.
Yeah, you can't even get those here.
You have to buy those from China.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure everything I'm wearing came from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Everything in this room came from somewhere else. All the food is from somewhere else. And you could spend some extra cash on carrots.
Veggies, yeah.
Yeah, pretty
Maybe,
much.
maybe some fruit if it's
Cabbage.
the right season.
Yeah.
lettuce,
Raspberry.
some berries. You know.
Yeah, there's not a lot
That's
of
like
local-
1% of the food we eat here comes from here.
Yeah.
So they say.
Well, it doesn't seem like there's much in any production here other than oil.
I mean,
we just
you
get
go
the
to
rake
the
off.
fair and you see the birch honey. It's
Yeah,
like
we got
$16 for a bottle that you could, you know.
But it's only like 25 or 50 cents for a stick of honey.
It's expensive to do honey. I had flow hives. It's
Yeah,
a
I mean,
pain.
I go to Sam's. Well, I used to go to Sam's Club.
Yeah, right. They opened that brand new one and then they closed it.
Some of the last purchases I made, I still have some, so it's not gone yet. I don't know what's going. I'm not a member of Costco, so I don't know if that's something I'll think. I just shop at the commissary more often than I used to, which is fun. You know everybody there and all that sort of thing. And it is cheaper.
Something.
And if you're Eastern Orthodox, you can always save money on your candy.
How's that?
Oh, well, that's because
And then do you hear about like the church split with Russia, Ukraine, and then I guess the Ukrainian church then split with Constantinople? So I don't know. It's like some kind of weird schism going on.
But it's cool to be Greek, not so much because of all the success of the movie The Big Fat Greek Wedding, not because of the success of the Olympic Games in 2004 in Athens, not because of every Greek festival you people have been to. It's always been cool to be Greek, and I'll tell you why. Because of our faith. We are Greek Orthodox, and our religion is different than anyone else's in this room. I swear, because everything that we celebrate late. We celebrate everything. We celebrate Easter a week after regular Easter. We're the only people who can make Jesus come back twice in the same freaking year. Celebrate a week after, 2 weeks, sometimes even 5 weeks after, which is great because our candy is so much cheaper. Of course, we're supposed to get the broken chocolate bunnies that you bastards never bought. It took me 20 years to realize that chocolate bunnies do have ears. I never got a fresh peep. There were marshmallow peeps. By the time I got them, I can break windows with a damn thing. My mother screwed up every piece of Americana things that you people took for granted because you were born here. My mom screwed up. She didn't know. Screwed up things like the tooth fairy. How can you possibly screw up the tooth fairy? I go, Mama, my tooth fell out. What do I do? Don't worry about it. One more, take care of everything. She takes my tooth, puts it into my pillow. The next morning, I look underneath my pillow. I find my mother's and father's personal check for $10. I'm not an idiot. I know what's going on. I took that check down, so I said, Mom, Dad, the tooth fairy is embezzling money from you guys. She screwed up Thanksgiving. What is the #1 ingredient in any Thanksgiving meal? Turkey. Now in the Greek house, it's lamb. Lamb? Who the hell eats lamb? We had lamb, moussaka, pasticcio, dolmades, spanakopta, triopites, feta cheese, and kalamata olives. Just like the pilgrim. And when you're Greek, no one wants to trade lunch with you. It's cool. It's like a bad episode of Fear Factor. I'm in 8th grade. Bob, what do you got? I got a roast beef sandwich. Nicky, what do you have? I had big sauce. Sammy, what about you? I got salami and cheese. Basil, what do you have? Woo! A goldfish.